how your voice, your single vote, truly shapes the future of our nation. What makes an election genuinely democratic, and how do we ensure our representatives truly serve our interests? Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're embarking on a crucial deep dive into the very heart of our democracy, electoral politics in India. Now, this deep dive is specially tailored for you, whether you're preparing for board exams or maybe competitive exams like UPSC, SSC, and others. We're going to explore, the necessity of elections, the intricate process involved, and what makes our elections truly democratic. And joining me today to navigate this essential topic is our expert guide, who will help us unpack these concepts with precision. Okay, so let's jump right into the fundamental question. Why are elections, which seem so central to democracy, actually necessary? To kick us off, let's look at a fascinating real-world example from our material, the Haryana Assembly elections of 1987.
That's an excellent starting point. Yeah, the Haryana Assembly election in 1987 offers a clear, practical illustration of the impact elections can have. You see, prior to this election, the state had been under Congress rule since 1982. Chaudhry Devilal, a prominent opposition leader, launched a movement called Nyaya Yudh, or Struggle for Justice. He then formed a new party, Lok Dal, and allied with other opposition parties. And his entire election campaign revolved around a powerful, pretty straightforward promise: to waive the outstanding loans of small farmers and small businessmen if his party came to power.
Wow, a promise like waiving loans. That must have been hugely appealing, right? What was the public's response to that campaign?
It certainly was. The people, clearly dissatisfied with the incumbent government and significantly swayed by Devilal's promise, voted overwhelmingly for Lok Dal and its allies. They secured 76 out of 90 seats in the state assembly. Lok Dal alone won 60, giving them a really decisive majority. The Congress Party, in stark contrast, managed to win only 5 seats. Following this result, the sitting chief minister resigned, and Devilal was chosen as the new leader by the newly elected MLAs. He became chief minister within 3 days and promptly issued a government order to waive those loans, just as he'd promised. So this perfectly demonstrates how elections can directly and immediately lead to changes in government policy and leadership, reflecting the public's will.
Right, so it's a clear example of the power of the vote, even at the state level. But, here's what's interesting. Devilal's party, despite that landslide win, lost the very next election 4 years later in 1991. That makes me wonder, if elections are just about changing governments, why have them again so soon? What does this kind of flip-flop tell us about the continuous need for elections?
That's a critical observation, actually, and it brings us to the core reason for elections. In a democracy, while direct governance by everyone is maybe ideal in theory, it's just not practical in a large, complex society. Constraints of time, knowledge, sheer scale. So people govern through representatives. Now, imagine if we picked representatives without elections, maybe based on age or education. How would we really know if they reflect the people's wishes, or if they're even doing a good job? And, crucially, how do we remove representatives people don't support anymore? Elections provide this essential mechanism. They allow people to choose their representatives at regular intervals and, just as importantly, to change them if they want to. Therefore, elections are absolutely indispensable for any representative democracy to function properly.
So when it all boils down to it, what fundamental choices are we, the voters, actually making when we step into that polling booth? Essentially, in an election, you're making several fundamental choices. You're deciding who will make laws for you, who will form the government and take the major national or state decisions, and crucially, which party's policies will guide both the government and the lawmaking process for the next few years.
So it's that regular choice that ensures accountability.
Exactly. Accountability and responsiveness within our democratic system.
Okay, we've established why elections are necessary, but you also mentioned that simply holding an election doesn't automatically make a system democratic. Lots of non-democratic countries hold elections too. So what are those critical distinctions? How can we tell a truly democratic election from, well, just a show? This raises a very important question. Based on our understanding, there are essentially 5 minimum conditions that really define a democratic election. First, the principle of one person, one vote, one value. This means universal adult franchise. Every eligible citizen gets one vote, and every vote carries equal weight. That's foundational. Second, there must be genuine options. Parties and candidates must be free to contest and offer real, distinct choices to voters.
Okay, choice is key. And what about the frequency and the integrity of the outcome?
Precisely. The third condition is that this choice must be offered at regular intervals. Elections need to be held regularly, usually every few years. Fourth, The candidate actually preferred by the people should be the one who gets elected, not just someone imposed. And finally, the fifth and perhaps most crucial condition. Elections must be conducted in a free and fair manner, where people can truly choose as they wish without coercion or manipulation. These might seem simple on the surface, but they are the critical benchmarks.
Now, elections inherently involve political competition, but is this competition always a good thing? It often seems to create a lot of noise, debates, even negativity sometimes.
Yeah, that's a very valid concern. Political competition, while essential, definitely comes with its downsides, its demerits. It can sometimes foster disunity and what people call factionalism, like deep divisions within communities. You often hear complaints about party politics getting in the way. Political parties and leaders might level allegations, sometimes use unfair tactics, unfortunately. Some critics argue this intense pressure to just win prevents sensible long-term policies. It can even discourage good, capable people from entering politics because the environment feels unhealthy.
So, given those clear drawbacks, why did the framers of our Constitution opt for this kind of free competition? What was their thinking?
Well, what's really fascinating here is the long-term view they took. Our Constitution makers knew about these problems, but they chose free competition because they believed, fundamentally, this system works better in the long run. Why? Well, human nature, really. In an ideal world, leaders would only be motivated by public service. But in reality, like other professionals, they're also driven by political careers, power, position. It's just risky to depend entirely on their sense of duty. Plus, even with good intentions, they might not actually know what people truly want.
Okay, so how does the mechanism of electoral competition address this? How does it actually make leaders responsive?
The most realistic approach, they figured, is to set up a system where political leaders are rewarded for serving the people and, crucially, punished for not doing so. And who decides the reward or punishment? The people, through elections. Regular electoral competition provides a powerful incentive. Parties and leaders know if they address issues important to the public, their popularity and chances of winning go up. Conversely, if they fail to satisfy voters, they'll lose power. It's a bit like how a market works. Even a shopkeeper driven by profit knows good service keeps customers. So political competition, despite its potential flaws, ultimately kind of forces leaders to serve the people.
That's a compelling analogy. Now, let's connect these principles to our own country.
All right.
How exactly are elections held in India? What does our specific system look like in practice?
Right. So our system of elections is both structured and highly regular. Elections for the Lok Sabha, that's our national parliament, and the Vidhan Sabha state assemblies are held regularly every 5 years. After this 5-year period, the term of all the elected representatives ends, and the Lok Sabha or Vidhan Sabha is automatically dissolved. When elections happen across all constituencies at roughly the same time, maybe on the same day or within a few days, we call that a general election. Sometimes, though, an election is held just for one constituency, maybe to fill a vacancy if a member dies or resigns. That's known as a by-election. But our main focus today is really on the general elections.
You mentioned constituencies. We hear about MPs and MLAs all the time, but how exactly do these constituencies work? How are people elected through them?
Certainly. In India, we follow an area-based system. The whole country or a state is divided into specific geographical areas just for elections. These are the electoral constituencies. Voters living in one constituency elect one representative from that area. Simple as that. For Lok Sabha elections, the whole country is divided into 543 constituencies. The elected representative from each is a member of parliament, an MP. And a key democratic feature, as we said, is that every vote should have equal value. That's why our constitution tries to ensure each constituency has a roughly equal population. Similarly, each state is divided into assembly constituencies. The person elected there is a member of Legislative Assembly, an MLA. Interestingly, each parliamentary constituency actually contains several assembly constituencies within it. This whole principle extends down to local elections too, panchayats and municipalities, where villages or towns are divided into wards, each electing one member. So when you hear a party won, say, 100 seats, it just means their candidates won in 100 constituencies.
Right. And that brings us to a really important aspect. Reserved constituencies. Why do we have them? What are they trying to achieve?
Yes, this is crucial. The framers of our Constitution were genuinely concerned that in a completely open electoral race, certain historically weaker or marginalized sections might not stand a fair chance. They might lack the resources, education, or connections to compete effectively against more powerful candidates. And if these sections were excluded, our parliament and assemblies wouldn't truly represent everyone. Our democracy would be less democratic, less representative. So to tackle this, they came up with a special system of reserved constituencies. For example, in a scheduled caste, or SC, reserved constituency, only someone belonging to the scheduled castes can stand for election. Same idea for scheduled tribes, or ST constituencies. As of early 2019 in the Lok Sabha, 84 seats are reserved for SCs and 47 for STs. This number is basically proportionate to their share in the total population. This ensures they get representation without taking away the legitimate share of other groups. This reservation system also exists at the district and local levels, including for other backward classes, OBCs, though the proportions can vary state by state. And importantly, 1/3 of seats in rural and urban local bodies are reserved for women candidates. Plus, the recent Nari Shakti Vandanatiniam 2023 reserves 1/3 of seats in parliament and state assemblies for women too. That's a major step towards more equitable representation.
Okay, so constituencies are defined, including reservations. The next logical step is figuring out who actually gets to vote, right? What's the process for the voters list?
Absolutely. The next vital step is compiling the voters list, officially called the electoral roll. This is basically the master list of everyone eligible to vote. It's prepared well before any election and made public. And it's crucial because it connects directly to that first condition of a democratic election, ensuring everyone has an equal opportunity to choose universal adult franchise. So in India, all citizens aged 18 years and above can vote. Doesn't matter what their caste, religion, or gender is. Only in very rare cases, like maybe certain criminals or people declared of unsound mind, can the right to vote be denied. The government has the responsibility to keep this list updated, adding new voters turning 18, removing names of people who've moved away or passed away. There's a complete revision every 5 years to keep it accurate. And in recent years, you've probably heard of the Election Photo Identity Card, or APIC. That's been introduced for identification, though it's not actually compulsory yet. You can still use other ID proofs like a ration card or driving license.
Got it. So pretty open for voters, but what about the candidates? Who can actually stand for election? Are there specific qualifications they need?
That's great follow-up. Our system is actually very open here too, ensuring a real choice for people. Pretty much anyone who is eligible to be a voter can also become a candidate. The main difference is the minimum age. It's 25 years to be a candidate compared to 18 for voting. Restrictions on criminals only applying in very extreme cases, like specific convictions. Political parties usually nominate their candidates. You hear about them getting the party ticket. This gives them the party symbol and support. And every candidate, party-affiliated or independent, has to fill a nomination form and submit a security deposit. It's usually a small amount, mainly to discourage people who aren't serious.
That seems straightforward. But these days, people often want to know more, right? Like about financial backgrounds, criminal records, even educational qualifications. How does the system handle that?
Yes, that's a really important point, especially for exams. Following directions from the Supreme Court, there's now a system of legal declarations. Every candidate has to provide full details of any serious criminal cases pending against them. They also have to declare their assets and liabilities and those of their immediate family, and state their educational qualifications. This information is made public. The idea is to let voters make more informed decisions. Now, about educational qualifications specifically, it's interesting. Our system doesn't require any particular degree, like a BA or anything, to be an MLA or MP. The thinking behind this is that the real qualification is the ability to understand people's concerns and represent their interests. And voters are the ones who judge that ability every 5 years. Plus, think about it. If you made, say, a graduate degree compulsory, you'd disqualify over 90% of citizens from even contesting. That would go against the whole spirit of democracy and universal participation.
Okay, so once candidates are nominated and all the declarations are in, the election campaign really kicks off. What's the main purpose of this phase, and how does it typically play out in India?
Well, the main purpose of the campaign is really to allow for a free and open discussion, so people can weigh the options and choose the best representatives, the government, and the policies they prefer. In India, the really intensive formal campaign period usually lasts for about 2 weeks. It starts after the final list of candidates is announced and runs right up to polling day. During this time, you see candidates actively engaging with voters, going door to door, holding small meetings. Political leaders address huge public rallies. Parties mobilize their supporters. Newspapers and TV news are just full of election stories, debates, analysis during this period. But, the actual preparation, especially by the parties, often starts months before the official campaign begins.
And campaigns are famous for those powerful, catchy slogans, aren't they? Can you remind us of some famous ones from India's past that students might find relevant?
Oh, absolutely. Slogans often capture the core message and really resonate. For instance, back in the 1971 Lok Sabha elections, Indira Gandhi's Congress Party used Garibi Hatao, remove poverty. That was huge. Then in 1977, after the emergency, the Janata Party under Jayaprakash Narayan used Save Democracy. Their promise was to restore civil liberties. The Left Front in West Bengal used land to the tiller in their 1977 assembly elections, focusing on land reform. And in Andhra Pradesh in 1983, N.T. Ramarao's Telugu Desam Party used Protect the Self-Respect of the Telugus, appealing to regional identity. These slogans are great examples of how parties try to focus public attention on the big issues.
But with all that intense campaigning, there must be rules to keep things fair, right? How do we prevent unfair practices from taking over?
Yes, definitely. To try and ensure every party and candidate gets a fair shot, campaigns are regulated by law and also by a model code of conduct. According to election law, parties and candidates can't bribe or threaten voters. They can't appeal based on caste or religion. They can't use government resources for campaigning. There are also spending limits currently, around 25 lakh rupees for a Lok Sabha constituency and 10 lakh for an assembly constituency. If these rules are broken, an election can even be rejected by the court later. On top of the law, all parties generally agree to follow a model code of conduct once elections are announced. Under this code, they can't use places of worship for propaganda, can't use government vehicles, aircraft, or officials for election work. And importantly, once elections are announced, ministers can't lay foundation stones for new projects, make big policy decisions, or promise new public facilities. It's all about preventing misuse of power.
Okay, so after the campaigning frenzy, we finally get to the polling day itself and then the counting. This is where the voter really interacts directly. How does this final stage unfold?
Right. The final decisive stage is Election Day, when voters actually cast their poll or vote. On this day, everyone whose name is on that voters list we talked about can go to a nearby polling booth, usually set up in a local school or a government office. Inside the booth, election officials check your identity, put that indelible ink mark on your finger to stop people voting more than once, and then allow you to cast your vote privately. And crucially, an agent from each candidate is allowed to be present inside the booth. This is to help ensure the whole process is fair and transparent.
And how are the votes actually cast and then counted? Has that changed much?
It has evolved, yes. Historically, you'd get a ballot paper, a sheet with candidate names, party names, and symbols, and you put a stamp next to your choice. But nowadays, electronic voting machines, or EVMs, are used almost everywhere. They're much more common now. The EVM shows the names and symbols, including unique ones for independent candidates assigned by the Election Commission. You just press the button next to the candidate you choose. Once the polling time is over, all the EVMs are sealed securely and taken to a central, safe location. Then, a few days later, on a fixed date, all the EVMs from a constituency are opened, and the votes for each candidate are counted electronically. Again, candidates' agents are present during counting to watch over things. The candidate who gets the highest number of votes in that constituency is declared the winner, declared elected. In a general election, the counting usually happens for all constituencies around the same time on the same day. You typically get the results within a few hours, and it becomes clear which party or coalition will form the next government.
We've really covered the mechanics, the what and how of elections in India, but now let's tackle arguably the most critical question. Does our system truly meet those democratic standards we discussed earlier? Are elections in India genuinely free and fair? Especially when we sometimes hear reports about unfair practices.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something students and all citizens really think about a lot. It's true, you do frequently read or hear about allegations. Things like false names on voter lists or genuine names missing, misuse of government facilities by the party in power, rich candidates spending way too much money, even voter intimidation or rigging in some places. Now, while many of these reports might unfortunately be accurate in specific instances, the overall picture suggests these issues are generally not widespread enough to completely undermine the basic purpose of the election. The core question really is, can a party win an election and come to power just through cheating, without having real popular support? Let's look at some key indicators to assess this.
Okay, indicators sound good. Where should we start? How about the Election Commission itself? How independent and powerful is it really in practice?
The independence of the Election Commission, the EC, is absolutely fundamental. It's a cornerstone of democratic elections in India. Our EC is designed to be independent, and it's actually very powerful. It enjoys a degree of independence similar to the judiciary. The Chief Election Commissioner, the CEC, is appointed by the president. But, and this is key once appointed, the CEC is not answerable to the president or the government. It's virtually impossible for the ruling party or government to just remove the CEC. That ensures their autonomy. The EC has broad powers. It makes decisions on basically every aspect of conducting elections, from announcing a schedule right up to declaring the results. It strictly implements that model code of conduct we discussed and can punish any candidate or party that violates it. During the election period, the EC can even issue orders to the government to prevent misuse of power or order transfers of officials if needed. And crucially, when government officers are on election duty, they work under the EC's control, not the government's. Over the last, say, 25 years or so, the EC has really expanded and used its powers actively. It often reprimands the government or administration for lapses. It doesn't hesitate to order a repoll in a booth, or even a whole constituency, if it thinks the voting wasn't fair. Even powerful ruling parties, though they might grumble sometimes, ultimately have to comply with the EC's decisions. That clearly shows its independence and power are real and vital for free and fair elections.
That's a strong case for its independence. Okay, beyond the institution, what about the people? Popular participation. Does the average person in India actually engage in the process, and what does that tell us?
Popular participation is another really critical indicator. If elections weren't generally seen as free or fair, you'd expect people to eventually lose interest and stop bothering to vote, right? But in India, voter turnout figures actually show enthusiastic participation. If you look at the data over the last 50 years, turnout has either stayed stable or in many cases actually increased. That's quite different from the trend in many parts of Europe and North America, where turnout has often declined. And there's another interesting aspect unique to India. People from poorer, illiterate, and underprivileged backgrounds tend to vote in larger proportions compared to the richer, more privileged sections. This is often the reverse of what you see in Western democracies like the U.S. Common people in India really seem to attach significant importance to elections. Surveys show a large majority believe their vote makes a difference. They feel that through elections, they can pressure parties to adopt policies that benefit them. Also, interest in election-related activities like attending rallies or discussions has been growing. For example, during the 2004 elections, over a third of voters said they took part in some campaign activity. So all these statistics strongly suggest a high level of popular engagement and a real belief in the electoral process.
That's fascinating about the participation trends. Okay, final test then. Acceptance of the outcome. If elections were widely seen as rigged, wouldn't the losers refuse to accept the results?
Precisely. The acceptance of election outcomes is perhaps the final, maybe litmus test of freeness and fairness. Think about it. In genuinely rigged elections, the outcome almost always favors whoever is already powerful. Ruling parties rarely, if ever, lose. But the outcomes of Indian elections tell a very different story. Ruling parties routinely lose elections in India. This happens both at the national level and in the states. In fact, the data shows that in about 2 out of every 3 elections held in the last 25 years, the ruling party lost. Contrast this with somewhere like the U.S., where an incumbent representative, someone already holding the seat, rarely loses an election. In India, about half of sitting MPs or MLAs lose their seats in elections. That's quite a high turnover. Also, candidates known to have spent huge amounts of money or those with known criminal connections often lose elections too, which is a positive sign. And barring just a very few disputed cases, the electoral outcomes in India are almost universally accepted as the people's verdict by the defeated parties. They might complain, but they generally accept the result. So when you look at this overall pattern, the EC's role, the high participation, and the acceptance of results, the conclusion is pretty clear. Elections in India are fundamentally free and fair. The winner forms the government because they genuinely have popular support.
So the big picture definitely points towards Indian elections being robustly democratic. But, a deep dive like this should also push us to ask harder questions. Are there still challenges? Things that stop our elections from being, maybe, perfectly ideal?
Indeed. While the foundation is strong, robustly democratic, largely free and fair, there are certainly several persistent limitations and challenges that we need to acknowledge. For one, there's the issue of money. Candidates and parties with huge financial resources often enjoy a significant, perhaps unfair advantage over smaller parties and independent candidates. Then, in some parts of the country, candidates with known criminal connections have managed to push others out of the race and even secure tickets from major parties. That's a serious concern. Another challenge is the tendency for some families to dominate political parties. This can lead to party tickets being distributed mainly to relatives, which limits internal democracy within parties. Also, for the ordinary citizen, sometimes the choice can feel limited. The major parties might appear quite similar in their core policies and practices. Does it offer a real choice? And finally, smaller parties and independent candidates often face a huge systemic disadvantage compared to the big established players. Now, It's important to remember these challenges aren't unique to India. Many established democracies around the world grapple with similar issues in different forms. But how we confront them here, how we address them, really matters for the future health of our democracy. These deeper issues are definitely a concern for people who believe in strengthening democracy. And they constantly fuel demands for electoral reforms from citizens, from activists, from various organizations. It really pushes us to think, is just holding free and fair elections enough, or do we constantly need to work on improving the quality of representation and choice?
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into electoral politics. We've really navigated through the fundamental why of elections, the conditions for a democratic election, the complex role of political competition, the detailed structure of our Indian system, constituencies, reservations, voter lists, nominations, and finally, a really thorough look at what makes our elections democratic while also being honest about the ongoing challenges. Understanding all these elements is so crucial, not just for your exams, but really for being an informed, empowered citizen in our democracy.
Indeed. We covered a lot of ground for the basic why elections, using that Haryana example right through to the details of constituencies, reserved seats, the voters list, how candidates get nominated, a campaign process, polling, counting votes, and then that crucial analysis of why Indian elections are considered democratic, looking at the Election Commission, popular participation, acceptance of results, and yes, acknowledging those challenges that remain.
We really hope this deep dive has given you clarity and confidence, whether you're studying for boards or gearing up for competitive exams. Remember, your informed choice, your vote, is what shapes our future. Stay tuned for more exam-ready insights right here on The Deep Dive. Subscribe so you never miss a topic breakdown and empower your learning journey.
In this deep dive, we covered the following topics: the necessity of elections, what makes an election democratic, the merits and demerits of political competition, the Indian system of elections, including constituencies, reserved constituencies, voters lists, and candidate nomination, the election campaign process, polling and counting procedures, and a comprehensive assessment of why elections in India are democratic alongside their existing